This video is a follow-up to the Gen 1 retrospective video I made a while ago. I suggest you watch that first if you haven't already. You know, I don't know why I expected to get to Gen 3 before Gen 9 came out, but here we are. Also, before anyone asks, this video's script was written and recorded prior to Scarlet and Violet's release. Pokemon Generation 1 was a massive success, so much so that Gen 2 was greenlit almost immediately, although I guess Nintendo got the lion's share of the money from Gen 1, as according to an interview Junichi Masuda had with Game Informer, Game Freak had almost no money to work with. Apparently, once Masuda started working on Gen 2 full-time, the game was not as far along in development as it should have been. So he took charge and decided the game would be based around the city of Kyoto. Kyoto, Johto, I see what you did there. This was because Masuda wanted the games to focus more on older cities in Japan and give it a more traditional feel. In the Game Informer interview, Masuda said he heard about the Toji Tower in the east and a sister tower in the west that had burned down. I'm already seeing parallels to what we see in game. More on that later. Now Gen 2 had a setting to focus on, but things were still not going well. Gen 2 was only supposed to take a year to develop, with the games originally set to release at the end of 1997 in Japan. Then to March 1998. And when March 1998 rolled around and the games still weren't ready, it was announced that the game would be delayed indefinitely. This was partially due to Pokemon exploding in popularity, so now Game Freak had to take time to make sure things outside the games, like the anime and card games for example, were going smoothly. Then around, I'd say, late 1998, Game Freak got then president of HAL Laboratories, Satoru Iwata, to help them finish development. To the man's legendary credit, it didn't take long for him to figure out how to fit everything Game Freak wanted in Gen 2 into a tiny Game Boy Color cartridge. This allowed Game Freak to put both the new Johto region in the game, as well as the previous Kanto region. The man was a genius. What more can I say other than, may he rest in peace. In November 1999, Pokemon Gold and Silver released in Japan and in North America in October the following year. Based on what I could find online, critics loved it, with ratings ranging from 8.5 to 10. Nowadays, I see people saying they either love it and it's one of the best gens in Pokemon, or that it's one of the worst. Still, most people tend to agree that it's easier going back to Gen 2 than Gen 1. While my first experience with the Pokemon games were Gen 1, Gens 2 and 3, and maybe 4, I can't quite tell yet, are the ones I have the most nostalgia for. I remember spending so much time playing Gold. In early grade school, if I was anywhere outside the house that wasn't school or the babysitters, I was playing Gold. If you recall my Gen 1 video, you'll know that I struggled to get anywhere outside of Vermilion until I chose Bulbasaur as my starter. Well, starting with Gen 2, I learned my lesson and chose Chikorita as my starter. And while I still got stuck in some areas, I was still able to power through them easier than in Gen 1. Eventually I would lose my copy of Gold, then got another one sometime during my teens, then barely played it due to a technical problem we'll get into later, though that problem would be fixed by my friend Neil. Thanks, Neil! But for the purposes of giving Gen 2 the best possible yet reasonable chance to succeed, we'll be looking at Crystal instead of Gold, since Crystal is supposed to be the definitive Gen 2 game. And sheesh! Old Pokemon games are expensive. This one costs over $100, and that's a bargain from what I understand. What's even funnier is that shortly after I bought this, there were rumors that Nintendo was going to add Game Boy and Game Boy Color games to Nintendo Switch Online, which would have rendered this purchase completely pointless. Luckily it wound up being just a shitty N64 emulator, meaning I didn't waste my money. I should probably start talking about the game now. Gen 2 takes place mainly in the Johto region 3 years after the events of the Gen 1 games. You play as a kid living in Johto's New Bark Town, and now, starting with Crystal, you can choose to play as either a boy or a girl. The first time ever in the series, in fact. Normally I choose the boy character because that's who I am. But for the purposes of showing off a new feature, I'll play as the girl this time around, and I'll use her canon name, Chris. The region's Professor Elm has asked us to run an errand for him. A friend of his past the next town, Mr. Pokemon, has made a shocking discovery, and see what the discovery is. He lets you borrow a Pokemon of his to join you on the errand. The Grass-type Chikorita, the Fire-type Cyndaquil, or the Water-type Totodile. I chose Totodile for this one because I used Chikorita all the time as a kid, and I used Cyndaquil for my hard gold playthrough, so I figured it was time for Totodile to get some love. After getting our Pokemon, we head to Mr. Pokemon's place where he tells us that the amazing discovery is that Pokemon are born from eggs. Wait, this game takes place 3 years after Gen 1, and even then it's implied that Pokemon have been a thing for much longer before that. How are we only just now discovering that Pokemon are born from eggs? Whatever. Mr. Pokemon isn't the only one there though. Professor Oak from the last gen is there too. He sees potential in you and gives you a Pokedex. After that, Mr. Pokemon gives you the egg he found and asks you to deliver it to Professor Elm. You then get a call from Elm telling you that something terrible is happening at the lab and that you need to return immediately. On the way back, you run into this red-haired kid who has a starter that's strong against yours, meaning he's your rival. But since you've most likely leveled up your Pokemon since getting it, the advantage is actually reversed. Before leaving, your rival tells you his name, but you can call him whatever you want once you get back to the lab. I was tempted to call him question mark since that's the placeholder for his name up to this point, but instead I went with his canon name, Silver. You give Elm the egg and tell him that Oak gave you a Pokedex. Then Elm encourages you to collect all the gym badges and challenge the Pokemon League. From there, the plot is pretty similar to Gen 1. Collect all 8 gym badges, become Pokemon League champion, fight Team Rocket and your rival along the way, become the very best like no one ever was. Oh yeah, Team Rocket's back despite the gang's boss Giovanni disbanding the group and going into hiding. Well, actually Giovanni has little to do with this new incarnation of Team Rocket. This is being done entirely by Rocket admins wanting to bring back Team Rocket and Johto. Their goal is to take over the Johto region, I think, and encourage Giovanni to come out of hiding so he can lead Team Rocket once more. Now that I think about it, if Giovanni disbanded Team Rocket and went into hiding to protect himself, how would taking over the Johto region bring him back? And to all of you ready to explain it to me in the comments, I'll get to it. Anyway, the fight against Team Rocket feels a little different this time around. I don't know, to me it feels like you're taking a more active role in stopping Team Rocket this time around, whereas in Gen 1 it felt more like you were just kinda stumbling across Team Rocket on your journey. That could just be entirely me though. But you're not the only one looking to stop Team Rocket. Both lands from Gen 1 and your rival of all people also want to take them down. Seriously, your rival fucking hates Team Rocket, to the point where he even fights you during Team Rocket's invasion of the radio tower for the right to be the one to finish them off. Yeah, Blue did this as well in Gen 1, but when Blue did it, it was because he was obsessed with getting a win over you. Whereas Silver is doing it because he hates Team Rocket and wants to end them personally. Why does Silver hate Team Rocket so much? Never explained! At least, not in the main series until Heart Gold and Soul Silver on the DS. There's a special Celebi event in the game where the player goes back in time and sees Silver arguing with Giovanni right as he's about to go into hiding. The conversation they have implies that Silver is Giovanni's son, and in the manga they straight up confirm this. Also, that the hatred he feels towards Team Rocket is due to Giovanni abandoning him, as well as the fact that Team Rocket is only strong as a group, and that any individual member of Team Rocket on their own is weak and pathetic. I mean, he's not wrong. This event also explains why taking over Johto would bring him back. That being that he was always planning on starting a new team after going into hiding, and that the new Team Rocket just kinda sped things up for him. My question is, why didn't we get any of this in the original release? Why was it left up to a manga and a remake years later to explain this? The only thing I can come up with is that this wasn't meant to be the case originally. Instead, someone decided to retroactively add it to Silver's backstory around the time Gen 3 released. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't read all of Pokemon Adventures, so maybe there's something earlier on that hints to it that I'm not aware of, in which case my hypothesis then becomes that the writers of the games were inspired by the manga. Back to Silver. He goes through something of a character arc in these games, starting out as an asshole who only cares about power, but after failing to eat the player so many times and getting a post-loss lecture from Lance about how he's being cruel to his Pokemon, he starts to mellow out and treat his Pokemon better. In fact, the last battle you have with him shows that, as he's evolved his Golbat into a Crobat, which is only possible when you have high friendship with said Golbat. He still takes things very seriously, but at the end of the game, he's not much of an asshole anymore. There is another major difference between the single-player campaign in Gen 1 and Gen 2. As I said earlier, you can explore the Kanto region as well as the new Johto region, specifically after you've become the Kanto Johto champion. Oh yeah, Johto is just like a mile or two west of Kanto, so they share the same league. This is the only time in the main series where two regions share the same league. From this point on, every region has its own league, and you can only explore that particular region. Back on topic, there's a route to the west of the entrance to Victory Road that leads to a place in Johto called Mount Silver. Supposedly, the Pokemon of Mount Silver are so powerful that even being League Champion is not enough to prove you're strong enough to handle it. You must also obtain both the 8 Johto badges and the 8 Kanto badges. So yeah, the game continues after the league with a mission to get the other 8 badges. For some reason I had it in my head that most of the Kanto gym leaders seem to not give a single fuck about you having all 8 Johto badges and being the league champion. But looking back through my footage, it seems most of them, save for Blue, don't actually see it as a small feat. Instead, most say generic gym leader stuff like, I won't go down that easy, so I guess I'll take back that one. While traveling through Kanto, you get to see what's changed in the 3 years between Gen 1 and 2. For example, they got the power plant up and running again, at least they did before this one Rocket Grunt who didn't get the memo about Team Rocket disbanding, again, steals a machine part. Also, poor Zapdos, who was apparently just shooed out by the scientists. Dude just wanted a place to chill. In Lavender Town, the graves in the Pokemon Tower have been moved to Mr. Fuji's house so they could convert the tower into a radio tower. Well, that's what they say, but I don't know. Mr. Fuji's place seems kinda small to hold all the graves. We sure they've moved all the graves to Mr. Fuji's place? Regardless, moving all the graves to make room for the radio tower seems kinda disrespectful to me. Still, I think I see what Game Freak was trying to do here with Lavender Town. From changing the town's main attraction from a grave tower to a radio station, to changing the creepy music to one that's more relaxing. I think what they were trying to do here was show that the town had moved on from the deaths of the people in Pokemon they loved. They haven't forgotten about them, nor do they no longer miss them, which is represented by the fact that Lavender is still the only place in Kanto with any kind of graveyard. But rather, they've finally made it through the 5 stages of grief and are allowing themselves to be happy again, which is represented by the town's main attraction becoming the radio tower and the new, more relaxed tone of the music. Like, they just got done crying and are feeling better now. Moving the graves still seems disrespectful to me though. Apparently there was a volcano underneath Cinnabar Island, and it erupted at some point, destroying most of the island. Most everyone who lived there moved to the Seafoam Islands, and again they shoot away a legendary bird since Articuno isn't there anymore. Come to think of it, Moltres wasn't in Victory Road, so I can only assume they were shoot out of there too. What is it with Kanto and kicking out the legendaries? Well, I guess that further backs up the progress versus tradition thing going on between Kanto and Johto. Back to Cinnabar, the only people left there are the people running the center and Blue, who has taken over the Viridian City gym now that Giovanni's gone. Apparently Blue likes to travel, which often takes him away from the gym he's supposed to be the leader of. Still, if strong trainers find him, he'll direct them to the Viridian City gym for an official challenge. Anyway, once you get all the Kanto badges, you're allowed to go to Mount Silver. Once you get to Mount Silver's peak, you can find Red, the guy you played as in Gen 1. If you'll remember back to my Gen 1 video, I was doing a pretty obvious thing with my party, that being that I was trying to replicate the party that Red would have in this encounter. I was never good enough to get this far as a kid. I was able to get this far as a teenager when I was playing through Heart Gold, and I only just beat Red for the first time on stream for this retrospective. I think it's this boss battle that made the fandom think that Red is supposed to be some kind of edgy badass. Silent former champion standing atop a mountain full of the most powerful Pokemon in either region, no music, just the wind. You approach him, he turns, he just glares at you, and then the hardest boss fight in the game begins. After this, I can see why people see Red that way, even though he's really just a vessel for the player in Gen 1. There's more new stuff in Gen 2 than just some changes and additions to the story. The first and most obvious is that since the games are being made for the Game Boy Color, there is now a wider variety of colors on screen at one time, and not just white, black, and 2 other colors. And I gotta say, when compared to Gen 1, this is a major step up. Also, now the Pokemon have little animations that play when they first come out of their balls. Isn't that cute? Well, only when your opponent sends them out, not when you send them out. There is also a new time mechanic that is supposed to work in real time. Basically, when you first start a new game, you'll be asked for the time and day of the week. Once this information has been put in, including whether or not it's daylight saving time, which I'm sure everyone knows that off the top of their head, clock-based events will start occurring. Some people will show up in certain areas on certain days to give you free items. Some events will happen, but only once a day or on certain days of the week. But the most noticeable is the day-night cycle. This is mostly used for catching wild Pokemon, as some Pokemon will be more likely to appear during certain times of the day. For example, Hoot is almost impossible to find during the day without the move Headbutt, but at night, Hoot becomes pretty damn common on the earlier routes of the game. And what's cool is that, like I said, it's supposed to work in real time. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, as this new clock function has caused some problems. You see, clocks need power in order to operate, so Game Freak decided the in-game clock would just take power from the save battery. The problem is that, as the name implies, the save battery is also what allows the game's save function to work. If the save battery dies, you can't save your game. The fact that the save battery is being used to save the game as well as work the clock, even when the game is powered off, means the save battery dies far more quickly than it would without the clock. As a result, the Gen 2 Pokemon games are notorious for how quickly the batteries die, to the point where if you look up a tutorial on how to change the save battery in a Game Boy game, 9 times out of 10 they're using a Gen 2 game as an example. Even the save batteries in Gen 1 games outlive Gen 2 save batteries by far. I've discovered recently that this causes some other problems as well. The plastic used for Pokemon Crystal is translucent, so you can actually see the circuits and whatnot inside the cart. As I write the script for this, I don't know if you can see it in the image I'm showing, but there's actually tape on the save battery on my copy of the game, meaning at some point the previous owner replaced the save battery. Before I started streaming this, I took that to mean that the game works as intended. It wasn't until later that I realized that for some reason the in-game clock freezes when the game isn't on. Basically, if I make a save on Saturday at 3 PM and then load that save on Sunday at 6 PM, the in-game clock will say Saturday 3 PM instead of Sunday 6 PM like it should. I'm not sure if something went wrong when the previous owner was replacing the save battery, or if they modded this copy to freeze the clock when the game isn't on so the save battery doesn't die as fast, or if it's something else entirely. Regardless, the clock didn't work as it normally does, so for this playthrough I allowed myself to change the in-game clock as needed. Next new thing in this game is a new stat. Kind of. What they've done is they've taken the special stat and split it into special attack and special defense. This had a major impact on just how good some Pokemon are. Some Pokemon were left relatively unaffected, some were made way more powerful, and some were just straight up turned into garbage. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm not smart enough to notice which Pokemon was affected and how, so to Google! Well, it looks like this guy on Reddit actually made a list of all the Pokemon affected by the split and how. Thanks, Reddit user ordinary_passerby. Your hard work has made up for my own lack of intelligence. Damn, big buff to Charizard, Slowbro, and Arcanine. Looks like they preferred buffing special defense over special attack. Well, why do they give Beedrill such a big special defense buff? Kangaskhan and Snorlax makes sense. They fucking better make up for taking rage away from Snorlax somehow. Looks like Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan got the biggest special defense buff. Can't say I use them enough to know if it's of any use. Why would you give a 40 special attack nerf to Gyarados? That's just wrong. Holy shit, the special defense nerfs. Almost all of this annoys me, especially the legendaries. Especially the Mewtwo debuff, for obvious reasons. Well, at least they left the Bulbasaur line alone. Any attempt to improve these guys would have just risked ruining their perfection. Well, that was enlightening. Thanks again, ordinary_passerby. Something else they added were 2 new types, the physical steel type and the special dark type. Being honest, not a lot of support for these 2 types right away. Only 6 Pokemon for both of these new types, only 6 dark type moves, and only 3 steel type moves. And for steel, they had to retroactively turn the Magnemite line part steel in order to hit the steel type 6. Though, to be fair, that does make a lot of sense. The new types barely exist in this gen. Steel at least was noticeable in Gen 6, it even got its own gym. Dark type, while having more moves and more original Pokemon, I honestly didn't think existed until Gen 3. But nope, it started here in Gen 2. The steel type is very defensive, go figure, being either resistant or immune to 10 of the 17 types in Gen 2. Furthermore, physical defense is usually one of, if not the highest stat on all of the steel type Pokemon in Gen 2, though it does have 3 common weaknesses: fire, fighting, and ground. The dark type is kinda hard for me to describe. I know it most for its immunity to and strength against the previously very OP psychic type, something that was very much needed as in Gen 1, psychic really only had a weakness to bug type Pokemon. It was supposed to also be weak to ghost, but some kind of glitch or oversight during development or whatever caused the reverse to be true. Now Psychic has 3 weaknesses: Bug, Ghost, and of course, Dark. Previously, the move Bite was a normal type move. Now it's a Dark type move, and it's just as common as it used to be, meaning that there's a good chance you'll have something to use against those pesky Psychic types, if only by accident. I couldn't find any trend in terms of stats for Dark types. I think the pattern is mostly balanced with a slight emphasis on physical attack, special attack, or both. But even then, there's an exception in the form of Umbreon. In terms of moves, all of the Dark type moves both do damage as well as having a secondary effect. Bite has a chance to flinch, Fanged Attack never misses, Thief steals the target's held item, you get the gist. I think the idea behind Dark is that it's supposed to be a little more strategic version of the normal type. I almost forgot to mention held items. Basically, Pokemon can hold items now. What's the point of this? Well, held items have certain added effects. like boosting the power of certain moves, allowing some Pokemon to evolve when traded, as well as other effects like sharing XP, letting a slower Pokemon go first on occasion, or double the money earned from Pokemon battles. And those are just the reusable held items. Also debuting in this game are berries. They aren't exclusively held items, as you can use them outside of battle, but I get the feeling they were intended to be used primarily as held items. Basically, they're consumable items that can either heal a small amount of HP or cure a status ailment. They can be found most often on these berry trees on routes alongside apricorns, which we'll talk about later. Back on the topic of held items for a bit, not all items can act as held items. For example, you can give a Pokemon a potion to hold, but they won't do anything with it. The in-game explanation being that Pokemon don't know what to do with man-made items. And I think the explanation for why other held items like black glasses work, even though I doubt those are just natural phenomenon, is that those held items are more like clothing that the Pokemon just wears. Apricorns don't actually have any purpose in battle. Instead, they can be given to Kurt in Azalea Town to have special Pokeballs made. These Pokeballs have, let's say, unconventional effects. For example, if you give Kurt a white Apricorn, he'll make a fastball, which makes catching Pokemon who run from wild encounters easier. Another example is the green Apricorn being used to make a friend ball, which speeds up the rate at which Pokemon caught with the ball gains friendship. The thing about Pokeballs made by Apricorns is that Kurt needs a day in order to make these things. And due to the problem with my specific copy of the game where the time doesn't move when the game is powered off, I would have to actually play the game until the game ticked over to the next day, or manually set the game a day ahead in order to take advantage of this. And while these Pokeballs can be helpful, they're not helpful enough for me to go out of my way to do that stuff. So I didn't really use them at all that much in my playthrough. Another thing added in Gen 2 is... okay. Basically, if you put two Pokemon of opposite sexes but the same egg type in the daycare together, they will breed and produce an egg, which will eventually hatch into the first stage of whatever parent Pokemon was of the female sex. Unless one of the Pokemon is Ditto, in which case the egg will hatch into whatever Pokemon isn't Ditto. Yeah, just breeding with Ditto is what most people do when breeding, because it's a lot easier than looking for a female version of the Pokemon you want and then finding another male Pokemon of the same egg type. Just catch a Ditto, leave it in the daycare, and forget about it. As far as I'm aware, the only real downside to Ditto breeding is that the baby won't inherit any moves if the non-Ditto parent is female. Breeding is, in most cases, the only way to obtain the new baby Pokemon introduced in Gen 2. Most cases! A baby Pokemon is any Pokemon that is the first form in its evolutionary line, obtainable via breeding, and is incapable of breeding itself. Gens 3 and 4 will introduce more baby Pokemon that you don't need to breed in order to get. But we're not talking about those gens yet. Next new feature, Shinies. So basically starting in Gen 2, there are two color variations of every Pokemon. The common normal version and the rare shiny version. It's basically the same Pokemon, but with a different color scheme and an extra animation when it comes out of its Pokeball. Okay, that's not entirely true. Based on my limited research, in Gen 2 specifically, Shinies tend to have slightly higher stat IVs, which means slightly higher stats. From what I can tell, starting in Gen 3 and beyond, shininess does not affect stats at all. The chances of finding a shiny out in the wild is 1 in 8,192. I mean, I understand wanting these things to be rare, but come on. Well, breeding for shinies is a bit different with...
nope.
Something a lot of people do is this thing called shiny hunting, where they just spend hours on end looking for a particular shiny Pokemon. I tried this in my Crystal streams, and it didn't go well. If you hear a Belkinus Necro Hunt in the background, that's because that's what I'm listening to while I'm looking for this thing. Alright, I'll see you guys when I find it, or when I give up, whichever comes first. 1 in 8,000 something chance. Okay, so this is, not going at all how I'd like. I've been at this for... about an hour and a half now, a little bit more than that. It's starting to get late and there's other things I need to do today, so I'm gonna pick this up in another thing. You know, it occurs to me that Spinnerak's butt looks like a Minecraft creeper. I still can very easily understand it as a post-game thing. Rare variants of anything make for great additions to any collection, including Pokemon. It's just not something I really want to spend a lot of my time doing. At least not until after I've beaten the League and the post-game. Still, another new feature is weather. These are actually pretty rare to see in Gen 2, but they can have an effect acting as both a temporary buff and or debuff for both Pokemon in battle, not just one. How it works exactly is dependent on the weather itself, the Pokemon in the field, and the moves they use. To my knowledge, there are only 3 weather effects in Gen 2. Rain, sunlight, and sandstorm. In rain, water type moves do more damage, and thunder goes up to 100% accuracy. In Sunlight, Fire-type moves are boosted, Synthesis heals more, and Solar Beam doesn't require charging. In a Sandstorm, any and all Pokemon that are not Rock, Ground, or Steel-type take damage at the end of every turn. There's more to each of these than what I mentioned, but that's the gist of it. In Gen 2, weather effects can only be triggered by a Pokemon using a move like Rain Dance, Sunny Day, or Sandstorm, and only lasts 5 turns. It's not something you're going to run into a lot in this gen, but it is something you can use to your advantage in battle. Next new feature to talk about is Friendship. Pokemon Yellow had something like this with your starter Pikachu specifically, but it didn't work anywhere near how it does now. So yeah, this game about building relationships with people and Pokemon has a friendship mechanic. Honestly, there's still not a lot to it. It's only really used to trigger specific evolutions, and it's also used for moves like Return and Frustration. There are a few NPCs here and there who will give you an item if your friendship with the first Pokemon in your party is high enough, but yeah, that's about it. However, friendship evolutions can be a bit of a pain from my experience, but I'll get to that later. Here's another new feature, trainer rematches. In Gen 1, once you fought a trainer, that was it. You can't find him again. Well, you can rematch the Pokemon League, but that's about it. Now starting in Gen 2, you can actually rematch select trainers after a certain amount of time has passed or if a certain amount of progress has been made in the game. How you go about getting these rematches changes not just from gen to gen, but from game to game. In Gen 2, your Pokegear has a clock, a map, a radio, and a phone. If you talk to certain trainers after beating them, you can trade phone numbers. After this, they can call you and potentially ask you for a rematch. This can be very helpful because Pokemon get more experience from Pokemon owned by trainers than they would that same Pokemon in the wild. This only happens once every 10 or so times they call though. Every other time, it's just filler. Them talking about how they won a tough battle or almost caught a Pokemon. Also in Gen 2, you can choose to have some of your winnings from battles sent to your mom. This results in her sometimes using her money to just buy you random shit. Sometimes it's useful, like a super potion. Other times, it's a literal doll you can only see if you visit your home. Question: who regularly visits the starting home in Pokemon after getting their first badge? I mean, I'm sure everyone does it once because they're in the area and need some healing, but seriously, there's a reason Team 4-Star turned the Johto mom into an agoraphobic drunk.
Get your money again!
Son, I just want you to know I don't have a problem, and everybody's telling me that I do.
No, Mom, it's okay. Mom, it's all right.
I went to the department store and I bought something for you with your money.
I am not
money.
shrinking. Do not call your father. Don't tell him.
I don't even have to me!
Back to trainer rematches, these can be helpful for raising your Pokemon as well as getting the occasional item. But the way it's handled in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, it's so annoying that to me personally, it's just not worth it. I got youngster Joey's number because the memes. And another trainer's number for a Firestone. After that, the number was swiftly deleted. If you guys have been watching my 1000 Year Door streams, you know how much stuff like this annoys me.
Thank you, email. That's the 4th time this stream.
So in my Gen 1 video, I brought up 3 problems I had with it and said that they would be fixed in Gen 2. Let's see how they were addressed. The HM stuff, in terms of convenience, is a lot better. Before, you had to go to the pause menu, pick the Pokemon who knew the necessary move, then select the move. Now, if you have a Pokemon in your party that knows the necessary HM move, a prompt will automatically appear and ask you if you want to use it. So much better. Number 2, the inventory. In Gen 1, you had a bag that could store 20 stacks of items. If you ran out of space in the bag, you could go to a PC and move some unnecessary items into item storage, which could store 50 stacks of items. Problem was that you were going to be picking up a ton of different items. In my Gen 1 video, I pointed out that there were 50 TMs and 5 HMs, meaning that if you were like me and weren't quick to either use or sell TMs, they were going to be taking up most of the 70 total stacks of items you had. Add in Pokeballs, healing items, key items, and so much more that you need to have, and item management in Gen 1 wound up being a huge mess. In Gen 2, you still only have a total of 70 stacks of storage between bag and PC, but now the bag has 3 extra pockets made to store specific types of items. All TMs and HMs go into one pocket with enough space for 1 stack of each TM and HM, and all Pokeballs go into their own pocket with, presumably, enough space for 1 stack of each kind of Pokeball. As a result, TMs, key items, and Pokeballs no longer eat into that 20 stack bag storage or the PC's 50 stacks. The item management problem is not gone, however, as the newly added berries and hell items do eat into that 70 total, meaning item management is still a thing you have to do every now and then, but it's not nearly as bad as it was in Gen 1. Looking back, I think I only had to use or sell an item to open up space a handful of times. In fact, I don't think I ever hit the limit of PC storage in my entire playthrough. Finally, the OP-ness of the Psychic type. In Gen 1, it had no real weaknesses aside from Bug, most of which were fairly weak themselves. Ghost-type was supposed to be strong against Psychic, but due to an error of some kind, the opposite wound up being true. The only real solution was to throw a good physical attacker at Psychic types, so long as they weren't Fighting type. In Gen 2, not only was the Ghost-type problem fixed, but they also added the Dark-type, which is immune to and strong against Psychic. It's also very common for non-Dark-type Pokemon to learn the now Dark-type move Bite. Furthermore, while Pinsir and Scyther are still just as rare as ever, they can be obtained earlier in the game during the bug catching contest. Psychic is still one of the more powerful types in the game, but due to all the changes and additions made, I don't think I can call it OP anymore. Oh, Arceus, how the hell did I forget to talk about Wrap in the last video? Okay, so in Gen 1, some Pokemon could use either Wrap or Bind. Both moves function identically, so yeah. Basically, if a Pokemon used this move, it would do damage to the target over a bunch of turns. In the meantime, neither Pokemon is able to do any moves at all. This means that if the Pokemon spamming Wrap is faster than the other Pokemon, there's nothing the opponent can do. I think I forgot to put it in my Gen 1 video because outside of around badges 2 and 4, this problem didn't really pop up for me. To be fair, I did have the Speedy Pikachu from the start of the playthrough. Gen 2 fixed this by allowing the target to attack as normal. Instead, the move prevents the trainer from switching out while Wrap is active. This turned Wrap and Bind from two of the most OP moves in the game to two of the most pointless. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about this. That's every major problem from Gen 1 I could think of, and all of them have been addressed here in Gen 2. Inconvenient HM usage? Check. Psychic type OP? Check. Wrap being annoying? Check. Inventory management? Yeah, the inventory is still a bit of a hassle, but it's much better than it was in Gen 1, so check. Yeah, there are some other things I want to talk about, but I can't come up with a good transition, so... Whitney! The bane of all Pokemon fans' existence! The most notable example of a difficulty spike in the entire series! The Devil Incarnate! She is... not that bad, actually. Don't get me wrong, I understand why so many people find her so hard to beat. Her Milk Tank is, well, a tank, being able to take a bunch of hits and dish them out just as easily. Combine this with a Trap, which inflicts infatuation, and Milk Drink, which can help Milk Tank recover HP, and this thing can be a bitch to take down. And then there's Rollout. Rollout starts out with 30 power, but each time you use it in succession, the base power doubles up to 5 turns. So on turn 1, it has 30 power, on turn 2, it has 60 power, 120 on turn 3, you get the idea. If that move is allowed to go on long enough, it can cause problems to say the least. Furthermore, despite Whitney being a normal type gym leader, Rollout is a rock type move, so ghost types aren't gonna stop anything. While I don't remember my first playthrough of Gold all that well since it happened about 20 years ago, excuse me for a moment. Anyway, I'm fairly confident I lost to Whitney a couple times as a little kid, but I lost to Falkner and Bugsy a dozen or so times more individually. That's not to say I think Whitney is easier than them. I remember in college trying to see how far in a Gen 2 I could get in one sitting, and Whitney did give me some trouble, but I beat her in my first try that playthrough. And that's because if you go into the battle with any degree of preparation or strategy, and I mean to such a small degree that you could do it by accident, Whitney won't give you too much trouble. What do I mean? Well, Rollout is only powerful when it's allowed to go off successfully multiple times in a row. If you do anything to make that difficult, such as lowering accuracy, raising evasion, or inflicting paralysis or confusion, Whitney's Miltank loses its entire edge. Furthermore, you can weaken Rollout even more by sending out Pokemon resistant to rock-type attacks, like the Geodude line, the Onix line, or the Sandshrew line. Getting one of these Pokemon on top of the previous strategy, yeah, that Miltank becomes not much more than a glorified damage sponge. I did both of these things in my Crystal streams, and the only thing Miltank did was spam Stomp and drink some milk. Now for my party. First off, the Totodile line. I chose Totodile this time around because as a kid, I would always choose Chikorita, and in Hard Gold, I chose Cyndaquil to mix things up a bit. Between Feraligatr, Blastoise in Gen 1, and the Swampert I'm using in my Alpha Sapphire playthrough, I'm noticing a trend when it comes to water starters. That being that, to me at least, while they're not super special amazing, again, to me, you can always rely on them to get you out of a tough spot. Usually, I don't start thinking I could lose a battle until my Feraligatr goes down. That's when I get worried. Another trend I'm noticing with the water type members of my team is that I almost always try to diversify their movesets in terms of type. It's not uncommon for most water type party members I have to have one water type move, usually Surf, cause why wouldn't it be Surf, one ice type move, one ground type move, and then one move of any other type, unless the region I'm traversing requires a lot of water HMs, cough, ho and cough. I always try to have more than one move type on all of my Pokemon, but water types seem to be the only ones I go all the way with for some reason. The Noctowl line. I was thinking thinking about making this a permanent party member, but upon obtaining a Dratini and some discussion amongst my friends, I decided Noctowl would only be a temporary party member. Still, Noctowl is fine. Noctowl is the final evolution of Johto's early game bird Pokemon, Hoothoot. It's about as good as you would expect. Good, but nothing great. There is one thing, however, that sets the Noctowl line apart from other early birds. You see, despite being normal flying, the Noctowl line can learn psychic moves naturally, the earliest of which being Hypnosis. But at higher levels, Noctowl can also learn moves like Confusion and Dream Eater. I gotta say though, 34 for Hoothoot and 41 for Noctowl seems pretty late for Confusion. Still, I'd imagine Hypnosis and Dream Eater would make a good late game combo. Oh hey, you can teach them Nightmare via TM too. Looking at Noctowl's TM moveset, I'm shocked it can't be taught any Psychic type moves outside of what it learns naturally. I mean, aside from Rest, which barely counts. Still, after looking at Noctowl's move pool, I gotta say that it might just be something of a missed opportunity. Geodude! Honestly, I don't think I used Geodude long enough to know just how effective it could be. Well, not for this game at least. Regardless, I don't have anything bad to say about Geodude in Gen 2, other than it doesn't stand a chance against water and grass type Pokemon due to its quad weakness to both. Plus, it's got low special stats, so any kind of special attacker is gonna give this thing hell. I can, however, speak about it in Gen 4, seeing how I used one in my Heart Gold playthrough. There, I never got it up to Golem since it's a trade evolution, but Graveler on its own is still pretty good so long as you keep its flaws in mind. Dealing massive damage with physical attacks that get stabbed, and being able to take physical attacks itself pretty well. But if you plan to use it all the way to the end game, try to find someone to trade with so you can get it to Golem. Growlithe line. He is a dog. I love it. Why yes, I am a dog person, how'd you know? Anyway, love Arcanine. But like most fire types, it feels pretty fragile to me. Still on paper, it's got pretty decent stats, with its lowest being defense and special defense, both at 80, which is, to the best of my understanding, average for an endgame Pokemon. Yeah, its worst stat is what other Pokemon call average. Whenever I wind up using Arcanine, I usually feel pretty confident that it can make quick work of whatever can't make quick work of it. This might be an oxymoron, but the best I can do to describe Arcanine is say, it's a dependable glass cannon. Oddish line. Arceus, this thing was annoying to use at first. Oddish learns 0 attacking moves aside from Absorb until level 23 and level 24 if you decide to evolve it into Gloom first. Furthermore, Absorb only has 20 fucking power and Acid only 40. It doesn't get a move that can deal decent damage until level 39 as Oddish and level 44 as Gloom. And you better learn it before evolving it into either Vileplume or Blossom, or you don't get to learn it at all. Luckily, I had another plan in store. Sunny Day to make bright sunlight, which I can then use to get a solar beam off without having to wait for it to charge. Throw in Sleep Powder for support and Acid just to round things out, and I have a Pokemon that can take out just about anything. So much so that a lot of times the Sunny Day part of the plan was unnecessary, since opponents would often go down with one solar beam. And since Sunny Day only has 5 power points, using it when it's not necessary can be a problem if you don't want to be going back to the center constantly. Still, all I really had to do with this strategy is determine whether or not Sunny Day would be necessary, and avoid fire types at all costs, and Sunny Day boosts fire type moves. You know, the moves that burn grass types like Vileplume to a crisp in 5 seconds flat. I mentioned Blossom earlier, a new final stage evolution for the Oddish line introduced in this gen. You get it by evolving Gloom with the newly introduced Sunstone. The first difference between Vileplume and Blossom is that the special attack and special defense stats get swapped, but it's only a 10 stat point difference between them. The second being that Blossom can learn Solar Beam naturally at level 55. I was tempted to go with Blossom just to show off a new Gen 2 evolution, however I still chose Vileplume for this strategy for the slightly higher special attack. Once I got the Sunny Day plus Solar Beam strategy going, Vileplume became another Arcanine-esque glass cannon, able to deal a lot of damage but not really good at taking it. Umbreon! Ugh. Okay. So Umbreon is a new evolution added this gen alongside Espeon. After struggling to make just a normal Eevee work in Gen 1, I decided I wanted to make up for it by using an Evolution on my team. Now, Espeon is a great Pokemon with its massive 130 special attack stat. However, I knew that Red used an Espeon in the final boss, which is what I based my team in the Gen 1 video around, and I wanted my Gen 2 team to be a bit different. Luckily, Umbreon was just as new as Espeon, was of the new Dark type, and a perfect counter to Red's Espeon. So yeah, Umbreon was in. Slight problem though. Both Umbreon and Espeon are friendship evolutions, meaning that your Eevee's friendship rating has to be at 220 and then level up. What friendship rating do most Pokemon start at? 70. And the two best things you can do to increase your friendship is hope to Arceus you can get a delighted reaction from the younger haircut brother below Goldenrod, which you only have a 10% chance of getting, or leveling up that Pokemon at the location you met them at. Problem: Eevee is a gift Pokemon you get from Bill in Goldenrod City. City! Meaning no wild Pokemon. Yeah, there are trainers underneath the city, but you can't rematch any of them. So once they're defeated, that's it. I will say that Team Rocket does invade here at one point, which helps, but once that's over, that's it. So yeah, the best thing you can do to evolve this Eevee into either Umbreon or Espeon is to get Delighted from specifically the younger haircut brother, who only gives one haircut a day, and even that only increases friendship by 10 points. So unless you want to sit there and grind for a while and abuse the game's clock function beyond what even I allowed myself to do, it's gonna be a while before that Pokemon evolves. And don't get me wrong, I understand the point of friendship evolutions is that they're supposed to be hard to get and you gotta work for them, but come on. I don't even have my own footage of Eevee evolving into Umbreon because I had to grind off screen to make that happen. Luckily I had all the Pokemon in Victory Road to help me since I actually made it to the league before this thing evolved. I got this Eevee before I even got my 3rd gym badge, and you're telling me my friendship with this thing still isn't strong enough by the time I reach the league when playing mostly normally? That is a bit much. Then again, maybe I was doing something wrong. In Chugga Conroy's Let's Play of Crystal, he got Eevee evolved into Espeon by the end of the Mahogany Rocket Base. I don't know what he did that I didn't, but it's a possibility. Anyway, I remember hearing a while ago that Umbreon was supposed to be one of the least favorable evolutions, but looking through various evolution rankings, now it seems to be viewed more favorably than I was initially led to believe, with it often ranking in the top 3, if not the top spot itself. And for good reason. This thing has incredibly defensive stats, and while its offensive stats aren't that great, I found it still got the job done in most cases. I use my Umbreon a little more strategically than I use my other Pokemon, with moves like Psychic, Fan Attack, Shadow Ball, and Toxic. Toxic is a move that doesn't just poison a Pokemon, it badly poisons them, meaning they take progressively more damage from poison each turn. So while it's not doing direct damage on its opening turn, its defensive stats are high enough to easily eat a hit on that turn. After that, spam one of the 3 offensive moves it has, or switch out to another Pokemon. Towards the end, I also started using Umbreon as just the default Pokemon to send out in any situation where I didn't think any of my other Pokemon had a clear advantage, simply because I knew at the very least I could whittle it down with some offensive moves. While obtaining my Umbreon may have been a massive pain in the ass, once I got him, he became one of the stars of my team. I guess all that time and energy was worth it after all. Magnemite line. Honestly, this one disappointed me a little bit. It's got a great special attack stat, a good physical defense stat, and an average at best everything else. Honestly, the reason I went with Magneton was because I wanted to show off the new Steel type, but I still needed an Electric type for my party, so Magneton it was. Besides, I used Magneton in my Heart Gold playthrough, and it was pretty good there, so it should work just as well here too, right? So you know how the physical special split works by type? Well, starting with Gen 4, the gen Heart Gold is part of, Game Freak changed how the physical special split worked so it made more sense to pretty much everyone. I'll talk more about that when I get to the Gen 4 video, but that combined with some changes made to Magneton's moveset and the addition of a new evolution after Magneton improved the line a whole lot. But enough about Magneton in Gen 4. What about Magneton in Gen 2, the one we're talking about? Well, Electric type moves are going to wind up doing a lot of damage. Chances are if Magneton was using an electric move on a Pokemon that doesn't resist it, the thing it's targeting is going to go down in one hit, or at least pretty damn close to it. It can also learn Zap Cannon leveling up, or in my case via TM. It's a move that packs one hell of a punch, and should the target live, it guarantees paralysis assuming the target doesn't already have a status ailment. The catch? It has a 50% chance of missing, and only 5 power points. This is why it's wise to pair up Zap Cannon with Lock On, a move that guarantees the next move you use will hit. Too bad you have to be twice the level necessary to learn Lock On in order to learn Zap Cannon. What the fuck else am I going to use that on? Nothing else Magneton learns has less than 80% accuracy. Well, except Thunder, which has 20 more power, 20% more accuracy, and 5 more power points. Come to think of it, I had Thunderbolt on Quips. And looking at Gen 2 Magneton on Cerebi, Thunderbolt had 50% more accuracy, 10 more power points, and only 5 less power.
What is the point of this thing?
It's basically just an endgame Thunder Wave, except there's a 50% chance of missing, which kinda defeats the point. You may as well just stick with Thunder Wave. Why did I choose to put Zap Cannon on Magnemite again? I think I realized how bad of an idea it was at some point, as I actually don't have any footage of Quips using Zap Cannon. I guess I figured that due to requiring Lock On to secure a hit, which would take up an entire turn, that it would be safer / more efficient to just use Thunderbolt instead. Did this Pokemon have anything else going for it? Well, Magneton is part Steel, that's gotta come in handy. Okay, so it does give us some resistances, and an immunity to poison, which is nice, but I don't know. For whatever reason, I just never considered Magneton the defensive kind, you know? Still, it gets Stab on Steel-type moves, and of course, being Steel-type means you learn some Steel-type moves, right?
Nope.
The Magnemite line doesn't learn any Steel-type moves at all in Gen 2. Not even via TM. So effectively, all the Steel type added to Magnemite in Gen 2 was a weakness to fire and made ground types all the more terrifying. To be fair though, with Magneton's pitiful physical attack stat, it's not like Steel-type moves were gonna do much anyway. This includes another almost exclusive move Magneton can learn, Tri-Attack. In Gen 1, Tri-Attack was exclusive to the Doduo line and Porygon, but Gen 2 added Magneton and Dugtrio to that list. The thing is that, despite the animation, it is a normal type move, so it uses the 60 physical attack stat instead of the 120 special attack stat. Despite all that, I can't say Magneton was useless. Basically, whenever I was up against either a water type or a flying type, there are a lot of those in this game, I knew I could depend on Magneton to get the job done. I just kinda wish I chose the Mareep line instead, or at the very least that I wasn't so obsessed with teaching this thing Zap Cannon. Dratini line. Now, this one was also difficult, but I feel I can't be too mad about it seeing as this Pokemon family seems to be designed that way. In the Fame Checker and Fire and Leaf Green, yes, I know, different gen, but hear me out, Lance says that Dragon Pokemon are hard to catch and raise, but their powers are superior. Lance himself has a Dragonite as the ace of his team. So yeah, raising this Dratini from level 15 to 36 in the few hours between getting it as a gift in Dragon's Den to reaching the league was impossible. At least without level grinding. But to be fair, I was gonna do that anyway, seeing as for whatever reason, my team is always under level towards the end game whenever I play any Pokemon game nowadays. So yeah, I didn't have a lot of experience with Dratini, but it wasn't the most effective party member. But when it evolved into Dragonair, it actually became usable. I could send it out against an opponent and not expect it to faint immediately. However, I was still kinda underwhelmed by it. And looking at its stats on Bulbapedia, yeah, it's got okay stats at best for endgame. Now I know what you're thinking. You're being too harsh on little Starlight. It isn't fully evolved yet. And you're correct. Starlight, my Dragonair, didn't evolve into its final form Dragonite the entire time I was streaming. I did say that I would do some level grinding off screen so I could evolve it into Dragonite and then rematch the league just to see how it stood up. But unfortunately, I took too long and the save battery is now dead. Rest in peace, Starlight. I'm sorry for not raising you to your full potential. But based on my experience with Dragonair and the stats I'm seeing for Dragonite on Bulbapedia, oh yeah, Starlight would have been a beast if they evolved. Once again, I'm sorry. Right, so we've reached the part of the video where I talk about the flaws of the game, but I really can't think of any that I haven't already brought up, like the save battery issue, how annoying the phone calls can be, how BS it is that so many Pokemon got massively nerfed, the story or lack thereof. I feel like anything I would consider a flaw I've already covered in this video, except for one thing: roaming legendaries. Yeah, this generation introduced roaming legendaries. I didn't talk about legendaries much in this or the Gen 1 video due to my more recent indifference to them. That, and I tend to see them mostly as post-game content that I usually forget to record because I start working on these the second I beat the final boss. So how normal legendaries work is that they usually either just hang out in one place waiting for you to discover them, or they are inaccessible until a specific moment, usually late in the story, where Game Freak then plans for you to Master Ball them. Roaming legendaries, on the other hand, move in patterns that I swear are completely random. Basically, they move from route to route every time you move from one route or city to another. And again, which route they go to is random, meaning it is a pain in the ass to find them. You can check where they are using your Pokedex, but that basically means every time you walk onto a new route, you pause the game, open your Pokedex, select the roaming legendary, and then hit area, just to find out it's on the other side of the region. Furthermore, even if you're on the same route as a legendary and you encounter any other wild Pokemon before encountering it, the legendary is gone. Your best bet is to pick an area where two routes meet, I usually do the area between routes 36 and 37, and just walk between them, checking the Pokedex each time. Repeat until you're on the same route as the legendary. But it's still not that simple. You see, normal legendaries will stick around and fight you until one of you is defeated or until the legendary is caught. Roaming legendaries? Nah. They peace the fuck out whenever they enter battle with you. Even if you paralyze them or put them to sleep, they will still have this status whenever you find them again, but this doesn't help much. There are moves you can use to stop them from escaping, like Mean Look and Spiderweb, which definitely help, but remember, they're still legendary. Legendaries are notorious in the fanbase for how hard they are to catch, meaning you'll be trying your damnedest to lower this thing's health, inflict status conditions, and then spend hours trying to get the thing to stay in the ball. And all of that is assuming you use a trapping move to start the battle. If you don't, or the legendary outspeeds you, you may as well just throw a singular ball and hope for the best. I encountered one of these by complete accident during my crystal streams, and it caught me completely off guard. I threw my only Ultra Ball, it shook once, broke out, and to the best of my memory, I never encountered one again in my playthrough. I would actually go back and try to catch one for the video, but again, dead save battery, so that's out of the question. Don't get me wrong, on a conceptual level, I like the idea of a legendary Pokemon you had to actively look for and hunt down, but the execution leaves everyone frustrated. I think it would have been better if the legendary picked a route at random and then stayed there until you encountered it. Then upon fleeing, it would repeat the process. Then instead of using the the Pokedex to find them, you'd have to check the TV spread throughout the world or the radio to watch/listen to news reports talking about how the legendary was reportedly spotted in a certain part of the region. This would then narrow it down to a handful of routes in one of 4 quadrants. Once you're on the correct route, you'll have a 25% chance of running into the legendary. And that's all I can think to mention. I feel everything I had to say about Gen 2 I've already said. And yeah, I had a lot more fun with Crystal than I did with Yellow. Don't get me wrong, Gen 1 gets extra points for me for being the first and also nostalgia. However, I'm also nostalgic for Gen 2, and it just fixed so many of the problems Gen 1 had, along with adding so many things that later gens would improve upon. In my opinion, if you were to judge a Pokemon gen based solely on how much it improved on the previous generation, Gen 2 would be the best in the series. If Gen 1 built the foundation, Gen 2 reinforced that foundation and then built upon it. Luckily, it seems popular reception has been kinder to Gen 2 than it was to Gen 1. Having recently played both, I agree. Going from the more recent Pokemon games to Gen 2 is far less rough than going back to Gen 1. With that said though, I would still recommend Heart Gold and Soul Silver before the originals, for the same reason I would recommend Fire Red and Leaf Green over the original Red, Blue, and Yellow. Solid game to start with that they added then modern mechanics to, as well as everything they had learned since the original release a decade prior. I don't want to go too far into it here, but Heart Gold and Soul Silver are actually my favorite Pokemon games. They're that good. Will I find later gens to be better? Probably, but right now I can't say for sure. And if I'm being honest, that kind of excites me. I am already looking forward to playing through Gen 3. Anyway, back on track. Gen 2 was originally planned to be the end of Pokemon. They had zero intention of making any more games after it. Yeah, looking back at it, that's pretty ridiculous. Yes, Pokemon was starting to wane in popularity by the end of Gen 2, but Gen 2 was still so successful from a business perspective that it would be stupid to not make another set of games. And make another set of Pokemon games they did. This time for the Game Boy Advance, which had just released prior to Crystal's North American release. In November 2002, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire would release in Japan, with North America getting it in March of the following year. Didn't wait until the holiday season that time, huh? But as you can probably guess, we're not looking at Ruby and Sapphire next. No, after taking a year or so to make the remakes of the Gen 1 games Fire Red and Leaf Green in 2004, Game Freak got started making the middle game for Gen 3, Pokemon Emerald, releasing in September 2004 in Japan and the following May in 2005 for North America. That is what we'll be looking at next in the retrospective. But that's not all. In 2003 and 2005, Genius Sonority released Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness for the Nintendo GameCube. These games feature connectivity with Ruby, Sapphire, Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, and even have their own single-player story mode. We'll be looking at Colosseum and XD alongside Emerald in the next retrospective. Why? Because if Legends Arceus counts as a main series entry, so do these. So, future me, when will we be playing these on stream? Well, past me, our current streaming schedule is Sonic Superstars on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Madden 07 Superstar Mode on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once we're done with Sonic Superstars, we'll start streaming Pokemon Emerald on Tuesdays at the normal time, followed by Colosseum and XD. Unfortunately, I don't have a time frame for when we'll be done with Sonic Superstars, so I can't tell you when the streams will start. Also, I want to say that this schedule is subject to change for any reason. Stuff happens and I may need to change the schedule as a result. Anyway, all this will be going down on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/CSNoz. Back to you, past me. Thanks, future me. With all that said, thank you all for watching. Look out for the Gen 3 video when it goes up, and I'll see you guys later with something else.